March this year is the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, led by the United States and its lackeys, including, shamefully, this country. The Iraq War was bloody, aggressive, and illegal. It should be remembered as a crime against humanity. How can the atrocities at Abu Ghraib prison, the attacks on civilians in Baghdad's Nisour Square, and the bombardment of Fallujah be called anything other than a crime against humanity? The war destroyed Iraq, took hundreds of thousands of Iraqi lives, 9 million people were displaced, 5 million Iraqi children were orphaned. Entire generations can never look at the sky the same way. And yet, the architects of this war and these war crimes walk free. Blair, Bush, and Howard have faced no accountability. The Bush administration manipulated the facts and deliberately deceived the public after 9/11. Hell-bent on invading Iraq, Bush stoked fear, hate, and Islamophobia to build support for war. Tony Blair exaggerated the case for war and rushed into conflict, the UK giving the US the diplomatic cover they needed for their criminal acts of aggression. John Howard gave false reasons for going to the war. Howard lied to Parliament and he lied to the public, and he remains unrepentant. Sadly, Iraq's people are not the only victims of the Western world's so-called war on terror, as the people of Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and others will attest to. Muslims throughout the world who felt the sear of Islamophobia because of the lies manufactured to enable the war were also victims of this so-called war on terror. Most offensive was the narrative that Iraqi people needed Western intervention to free them. Black and brown people have never needed white saviors. The reality is that they were seen, and they are seen, as just pawns in the game of imperialists, their pain and suffering completely ignored. Greed is often at the core of warmongering. Before the 2003 invasion, Iraq's domestic oil industry was state-owned and closed to Western oil companies. After the war, it was largely privatized and is now dominated by foreign firms. The likes of ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, and Chevron have all set up shop in Iraq. 20 years on, justice has not been served. The arrogant AUKUS dealers demonstrate the Western war machine remains as powerful and bloodthirsty as ever, including here in Australia. We see constant hysterical warmongering on our front pages, and no regard for the impact on Chinese communities, just as there was no regard for Muslim communities 20 years ago. Disgracefully, the Albanese government is as eager as the Morrison government was to make Australia America's little lapdog. They are too cowardly to admit that nuclear submarines, missiles, bombs will not protect people. In Australia, we face the worst housing crisis ever. More and more people are living in poverty. Amidst the climate crisis, a code red for humanity has been declared. When it comes to these mammoth problems, the Labour government shrugs its shoulders and cries poor. There's not enough money to stop the growing homelessness crisis, they say. There's not enough money to raise income support so people don't have to live in poverty and children don't have to go hungry. There's not enough money to provide higher education without punishing students with mountain-high debt. We are nowhere near the action so desperately needed to stop the ticking climate bomb. But there is unlimited money for dangerous weapons and war machines that we don't need. $360 billion of it, to be precise, pumped straight into the US weapon companies and the military-industrial complex, courtesy of the Australian public. Austerity for people and planet, abundance for the war machine. Iraq deserves full accountability and reparations for what Western invaders did. We owe this to the people of Iraq and to the countries that were targeted and the victims of these wars. We need to push back against Labour and the Liberals' war agenda with every fibre of our being. We must mobilise against war and militarisation. We must build a mass movement of peace. Let's learn the lessons from past colossal failures of entirely futile and bloody imperial wars that have been waged by Europe, the US, and their Western allies like Australia. Let's not repeat these unmitigated disasters.